Have you ever seen a play? If you've seen a play, you know that a play draws you in. It gets you interested, gets you excited, gets you interested in seeing what's happening next. How would you like to tell stories that have the same powerful effect to engage and pull people in as you're familiar with from the play? That'd be cool. That'd be nice. Just imagine, you tell a story, it's the same power, the same effect, the same grace as a play. And the thing is, you can do it. Once you understand how the play is set up, once you understand the power of the acts. There are many different types of plays, but one of the most popular plays is the three-act play. And each act has a different purpose. Each act is a different reason. Once you understand this reason, then you start to understand a little bit more about how you really can tell engaging stories. And it's very simple. Once you get this secret, once you understand the secret of how the three acts work, then you can take control of the stage. Then very quickly you can make those stories happen. You don't have to fuss over them all the time. It's a simple process to work your way through, and once you do that, you start to enjoy yourself more on stage. The nervousness, the scaredness goes away because all you're doing is telling a story. And everybody has a story. You have a story to tell. Tell your story up there. When you tell it in three acts so it's effective and it's interesting and it pulls people in. Each act has a different purpose, a different reason for being. And what happens to many speakers is they don't understand how a story works. And so they'll go on and they'll tell things, and pretty soon you're kind of stuck in a story. I'll tell stories like, well, the other day I got out of bed, went and had some food, went outside, walked around, beautiful day, loved it, came back home, went to bed. Next day woke up, had some food, went outside, beautiful day, loved it, went to bed. Next day, what you've got is a boring story. You ever heard one of those stories? You ever sat there with one of those stories going on, and you just wish you could just get them to stop somehow? Just stop! It's a really boring story. Don't say that stuff anymore. You ever felt that? You ever told that story? You ever got up in front of people and told a story? You know it was a perfectly good story. It was a great story. But somehow when you got it out, it just started rambling on. It didn't really go anywhere. Nothing really seemed to be happening in it. Weren't sure why. And as you told the story and looked out at the audience, you could see everybody slowly aging. Your audience aged right before your eyes. They seemed young, youthful, excited, and then after a while they just got older and feebler. And by the time you finished with that horrible story, they're all kind of dried out husks of what they had been before. Well, it doesn't need to happen. You can tell a powerful, engaging story that'll pull your audience in, get them interested, get them excited. You understand how the three acts work. Once you understand the three acts, then you can tell a story and your audience will be sitting on the edge of their seats, really interested in hearing what happens next and where everything is going. You'll finally think, aha! That's how you tell a story. That's how it works. Everything will start to kind of come together. And you'll get it in a way you never had before. And it really has to do with understanding the three acts and how the three acts of the story work. So today you're going to learn that. You're going to learn about the three acts of the story. All the acts of the story, you're going to learn about the important act. Simple, but very important. Act 1. All right, you're telling your story. now it's Act 1. Act 1 of your story is something that's very simple, very basic. You may think, of course, just the way it goes. But Act 1 is important. It's a special reason for Act 1. The good news is Act 1 is simple. You can take charge of the stage right now with Act 1 because it's the simplest of all of them. It doesn't really require a lot of work, doesn't really require a lot of effort. But it's all part of that process in working your way through and making a good story. It's all part of the process of making that story happen. Act 1 is very crucial in the story-making process, and if you come from up there, important to tell Act 1. In Act 1, simply the beginning. Beginning. That's it. Every story has to begin somewhere. And Act 1 is simply where you lay it out. The thing about Act 1 to keep in mind is everything in Act 1 should be smooth and calm and ready to go. Everyday life. Act 1 is where everything is. And it's ordinary life, and it's just about ready to change. But it hasn't changed yet. In Act 1, you see everything calm, easy, relaxed. No issues, no problems. Now, later on, it'll be different. You get to Act 2 and 3, things get a lot different. But in Act 1, it's all very calm. It's important. Think of it as setting the scene. At the beginning, you want to set the scene. What is the scene? Where is it all coming from? What do you know about that character? What do you know about that situation? That can be Act 1 itself. Act 1 doesn't have to be long. It doesn't have to be long or complex or involved. It can be very short, very simple, very brief. But Act 1 does have to be clear, because have you ever heard a story where you're not quite sure what's going on? Maybe you've heard these stories that kind of begin in the middle. Something like, so angry at that person. Yeah, they were doing this thing and I got upset at them and I couldn't believe they were doing it because, you know, it was such a problem when they were coming and doing it, and it was bad. It was just bad. I got so upset and I just couldn't understand it because, you know, they weren't supposed to be doing that. And have you ever heard stories like this that kind of go on like, I was angry, I was upset, whatever, and you kind of start there. You're thinking, why were you angry? Why were you upset? What happened that this got you so riled up? What's the big deal? And that's what happens when your story's missing Act 1. You jump right into exciting scenes, but you don't know the background. Since you don't know the background, you don't know the Act 1, everything's okay, here's where things are going, you really don't understand what the big deal is. So make sure your story is in Act 1. It doesn't have to be a lot. Just understand where the background of the story is, what's happening. It could be as simple as, for years, I told my stories, I had no problem. I got up there, I told a story, the audience went to sleep, we were both happy. The audience got a good snooze, and I got to tell my story. That could be it. You know a little bit of background. Not the most interesting storyteller. Okay, you got that. That's Act 1. Now, Act 1 can be blown out more, longer. And how you do that is up to you. Tell longer details about what you did, and your background, all that kind of thing. And that's fine if you're going to do storytelling. If you want to make a point, best to keep the story short. So even Act 1 can be very, very brief, very quick. Now, of course, once you have Act 1, you're at the beginning of the story, then you got to go to Act 2. And Act 2, something's got to give. The beginning where you set the scene. Just the beginning of the story. Every story has to have a beginning. You have to understand where things start. But if all you have is that story where nothing happens, then you have that same boring story. I woke up, I ate, went outside, nothing happened. The story doesn't go anywhere. No, you need an Act 2. And Act 2, things start to happen. They start to happen fast. Act 2 is very important for your story to make sure it's going. Don't have Act 2 in your story, the story never gets anywhere. Once you put Act 2 in, then things start to happen. Then when you're going through the story, you can just sense that audience being interested in what you're doing up there. You get a sense of, hey, this is going someplace. And very quickly, this Act 2 can make that story just take off. You got a process we're working through. You're Act 2 now. Getting there. And it becomes more fun to be up on stage. Just more enjoyable because things are just starting to flow. And Act 2 is conflict. Conflict. If you're telling a story and there's no conflict, you're telling a boring story. You're telling that story of somebody gets up and everything's fine and wonderful and great. That's okay for Act 1. Things can start out wonderful and great. But at some point, there has to be conflict. And that conflict in Act 2 will drive that story forward. Act 2 is where things just really start to happen. All of a sudden, things become difficult. All of a sudden, there are problems to overcome. There are things that just aren't quite working the way you'd like them to work. Act 2 is very, very important for that. You got to get this conflict going. Build the conflict. And you can't just let the conflict go. Act 2 is about different things that reinforce that conflict, that build up that conflict, that make that conflict greater. You're telling a story, it's not enough that there's a conflict. You want to build up the conflict somehow. You can build it up very quickly, in a short period of time if you want. Or you can spread the conflict over a longer period of time. It depends on how long you plan to be telling your story. In general speech making, especially motivational speech making, you want to have the conflict be fairly quick, but also fairly intense. So there'll be multiple challenges, multiple problems. Maybe internal problems, possible something going inside that prevents you from doing whatever you want to do. Maybe external problems, something's preventing you from where you want to go. But there has to be that conflict. Conflict really builds it. Act 2 is all about that conflict and building that conflict, making it really happen, making it really grow. So when that conflict starts to grow, then you start to get somewhere. You know where it gets good in a movie? You watch the movie and you're starting to get to that place, you go, oh yeah, then you're starting to get good here. That's where the conflict's happening. Conflict builds up all that problem situations and makes things really, really go. So remember, put that conflict in, put that Act 2 conflict in and build it and grow it, and then you'll see problems start to happen. See, in the story, there's some sort of tension going on. There's some sort of thing happening. There's something's got to give. Something's got to give. You can't just go on the same way you've always gone. Something's got to give. That conflict will drive that story forward until something has to happen. And that's what Act 2 is all about, building and growing that conflict. As world champion speaker Craig Valentine said, imagine the movie Titanic if the water didn't rise. It's that rising water that creates the conflict, that creates the tension, that creates the problem. So build that conflict, grow that conflict. That's what Act 2 is all about. And once you have that going, you're almost there. You're almost there to the end, but something very important has to happen. You can't just have conflict and conflict forever. Act 2 just can't go on forever. There has to be an Act 3. And Act 3 is when things really change. Then you get to Act 3. Act 3 is very important. And quite often, many speakers will do their story, they'll forget about Act 3. They've got Act 1, they got a beginning. That's great. Got an Act 2, conflict builds and builds and builds, there are all sorts of problems going on, but somehow never gets to Act 3. Leaving at Act 3 leaves out the real point of the story. The most important point of the story is in Act 3. Leaving it out, the story is just nothing. Once you put in Act 3, once you make Act 3 sure Act 3 is there, and it's really active, then the story comes together. Then your 3-act story really starts to work. Then you got control. Then you really feel that the story is starting to go somewhere. Then you got all the processes and it really starts to be fun up there because the whole story is clicking, everything is just moving. And Act 3 is transformation. Transformation. You see, even when you set the scene, even at the beginning, tell the beginning of the story, great. And you've got your conflict, it builds and builds and builds. If there's no transformation, if there's no Act 3, no point. Something has to give, something has to change. That conflict isn't just conflict for the sake of conflict. It's the sake of transformation, causing some major change in the worldview of your character, in the worldview of your story. Somehow your story is somewhere here. Somehow by going through this Act 3 transformation, it comes over to here. You see this all the time in great stories, where the person the story is about has all sorts of problems and situations, and suddenly they realize that things are different than what they thought. They thought this, and suddenly that conflict pushes them to understand, actually things are a different way. It's a powerful technique. It's a powerfully, amazingly useful technique. Act 3, transformation. It is often left out. But it's very simple to do. Very simple to do. Just when you tell your story and you get all that conflict going on, ask yourself, what's the cause of that conflict? Why is there that conflict? The transformation will come when the person who's creating that conflict or experiencing that conflict somehow starts to do things differently. They have this worldview over here, and suddenly they change over to here. There's a transformation that occurs. Even if you resolve the conflict, and the conflict just kind of goes away, that's not enough. It's not enough to create a really great 3-act story. It has to be this transformation. For instance, if somebody goes through and they're constantly fighting at people, constantly angry, maybe at some point they realize they aren't angry at other people. They're angry at themselves. Possibility. Or when they go through and they're constantly working on something and working on it and building on it and having struggles and setbacks and problems, and suddenly they get it. When they get it, it transforms them. Suddenly they do things in a different way. They look at the world in a different way. They have a different perspective, having overcome all those problems. That's transformation. That's what transformation is all about. And it is powerful. You give this 3-act play, the transformation, it is amazingly powerful because that's what your audience wants. Your audience wants to be transformed. And once you show the story of here's how a transformation happened, the audience will say, how could that happen to me? How do I get transformed? And that's when you go on your pitch and talk about whatever you're going to talk about. That's when you push whatever you're going to push, discuss whatever you're going to push, say whatever you're going to say, make your point. After that, transformation occurs. Remember, when you're going through the 3 acts, don't forget the 3rd act, transformation. And that's the story. A 3-act story. It begins with the beginning. The beginning, where you set the scene. You understand what's going on. It's Act 1. Act 1 is so important because once you understand what's going on, then all the other acts will start to make more sense. If you don't understand what's happening at the beginning, then nothing makes any sense. You get confused. You think, what the heck's going on here? I don't get it. Who are these people? What's the big deal? Why should I care? Setting the scene, the beginning. Showing that beginning of that story. Just making sure what's going on, the audience knows what's going on. Get your story started off right. Once you got Act 1, of course, you got to go to Act 2. And Act 2 is all about conflict. Conflict. There's got to be a problem. There's got to be some problem that prevents the character, the person, whatever, from getting to wherever they want to go. That problem, that thing, that constant problem is the issue. And the conflict can't just be one conflict. Oh, conflict, oh, solved it. No, no. It has to be one conflict, and then they solve that, and they go to another conflict, they solve it, go to another conflict. Build the conflict. Act 2 is all about building that conflict. Not just one conflict, but many. Somehow find a way to build it, build the frustration. And it could be a short story, it could be a longer story, but however long or short it is, make sure there's Act 2. Where you build that frustration, you build that problem. You build that awareness. You're almost there, but don't forget about Act 3. Act 3, the transformation. The transformation of your character from wherever they were to wherever you want them to be. Many speakers leave out transformation. Don't do it. Make sure there's a transformation of the story in your story. And it's simple. All it indicates is all the things that the person was struggling with change that person in some way. All the Act 2 conflicts change the person and transform them so they start to do things differently. They see the world differently. They approach things differently. That's all that transformation means. But it is very powerful. By showing us someone has a beginning, all these conflicts and overcomes to be transformed, your audience starts thinking, I want that. I want to be transformed. Once you got an audience thinking they want what you're talking about, you got an audience where you want them. Stories freak people out. They don't know what to do with them, or how to do them, or the ways to do them. But the 3-act story is so simple, so easy to do once you understand it and understand its nature. Act 1 of the beginning, Act 2 of the conflict, Act 3 of the transformation. Just put all those together, you've got a very powerful story. And stories are important because examples tell, stories sell. You want to get people across, get people interested in, stories what it's all about. Telling a good story with 3 acts really helps pull people in. And when you do that, when you tell a story with 3 acts, then you have full control of what's going on. You own the stage up there. You are the stage. People look at you with respect and differently because you can tell a story, people just look at you differently. They respect you more, they pay attention to you more. They think, yeah, that person knows something. I better pay attention. And it's simple. You don't have to waste your time worrying about what sort of story to tell. It's simple. Just here's the beginning, create some sort of conflict, some sort of transformation at the end. As long as you have those 3 acts in your story, you've got a good story. It's that easy. And that's simple to follow the process. Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. Just go back. Okay, where's the beginning? All right. Now where's the conflict? Okay, good. Building that conflict. Where's the transformation? That's all you need. You do that, you start to enjoy your stories, have to have fun out there. So remember, you're telling a story, make sure you tell your story in 3 acts.